Ethan Vale had seen real war. Not the kind people watch on screens. The kind where buildings fall, the sky burns orange, and men scream in the dark. After years covering war zones across the world, Ethan came back to Raven City, expecting chaos. But what he found was something stranger. Everyone in the city feared one man, the Grin King. People talked about him like a storm, like a force of nature. A mad genius who loved chaos. A monster who appeared out of nowhere, leaving laughing gas, twisted jokes, and ruined lives behind. But Ethan didn't believe it. He watched the news clips, the police reports, the terrified interviews, and all he saw was something pathetic. "That's not a mastermind," Ethan said during a late-night radio interview. "That's a man begging the world to look at him." The city went silent. No one talked about the Grin King like that. But Ethan wasn't interested in fear. He was interested in truth. So he started digging. Old crime scenes. Abandoned hideouts. Street rumors whispered in dark bars. Every clue pointed to the same place, an abandoned comedy shop rotting in the oldest part of Raven City. One rainy night, Ethan stood across the street from the building, camera in hand, watching the broken neon sign flicker. Inside that building was the man everyone feared. Ethan took a slow breath and stepped forward. Because if he was right about the Grin King, then, the most dangerous thing in Raven City wasn't chaos. It was loneliness. The abandoned comedy shop smelled like dust, mold, and something chemical. Ethan Vale moved quietly through the broken front door, his recorder in one hand and a small camera in the other. The neon clown sign outside flickered through the cracked windows, painting the room with weak red light. Old joke props were scattered everywhere. Rubber chickens, fake flowers, torn posters of smiling comedians from another era. But something about the place felt organized. Too organized. Ethan heard voices from the back room. He crouched near the doorway and slowly peeked inside. The Grin King stood in the center of the room. Not laughing. Not dancing. Not acting crazy. He was studying a large map of Raven City taped to the wall. Colored pins marked different neighborhoods. Notes were written everywhere. Timetables. Escape routes. Supply drops. It looked less like madness, and more like a military operation. Around him stood several henchmen wearing crude masks. One of them spoke nervously. "Boss, maybe we should delay tonight's plan. The police presence is heavier than expected." The room went quiet. The Grin King slowly turned his head. He didn't shout. He didn't joke. He calmly pressed a small remote in his hand. A loud hiss filled the room. A trap under the floor released a stream of burning liquid. The man screamed and collapsed as the others stepped back in terror. The Grin King sighed softly. "Negativity spreads," he said. Ethan's heart pounded. This wasn't a clown. This was something far colder. And before Ethan could step away from the door, a hand grabbed his shoulder from the darkness behind him. "Well," a voice whispered, cheerful and curious. "Looks like we have an audience." Ethan Vale was dragged into the center of the room. The henchman forced him to his knees under the flickering lights of the abandoned comedy shop. Cameras, maps, and strange chemical containers surrounded him. The air smelled sharp and metallic. The Grin King stepped closer. For a moment he just studied Ethan. His pale face showed curiosity more than anger. The painted smile on his lips didn't move, but his eyes were bright, almost excited. "Well," the Grin King said softly. "A journalist." He walked slowly in a circle around Ethan like a scientist examining a rare specimen. "You broke into my office. That means you either have courage or a death wish." One of the masked men raised a crowbar. "Boss, should we?" The Grin King lifted one finger. The room fell silent. "No interruptions," he said calmly. Then he leaned closer to Ethan. "Tell me," he whispered. "What did you come here to learn?" Ethan didn't beg. He didn't tremble. Instead, he looked directly into the Grin King's eyes. "You hate them," Ethan said quietly. The henchman shifted uncomfortably. Ethan continued. "These people around you, they aren't your friends. They're tools. You push them, scare them, use them." The room grew completely still. "You don't want chaos," Ethan said. "You want attention." The Grin King tilted his head slightly. "You're not a legend," Ethan finished. "You're just a lonely man who needs the world to notice him." For a long moment no one moved. Even the henchman looked nervous. Then the Grin King slowly began to smile wider. Not angry, not offended, but fascinated. Finally someone had said it out loud. And before he could respond, the ceiling exploded above them. Glass shattered. A dark figure dropped into the room. The night sentinel had arrived. The explosion of glass and smoke froze everyone in the room. The night sentinel landed between Ethan and the Grin King like a shadow come to life. His dark armor absorbed the flickering neon light, while the henchman stumbled backward in panic. "Party's over," the sentinel said calmly. Chaos erupted. Smoke bombs rolled across the floor. Henchmen ran in every direction. The Grin King simply stepped back, watching the scene with quiet amusement. Ethan felt someone cut the ropes around his wrists. "Move," the sentinel ordered. They rushed through the back exit as sirens began to echo across Raven City. When Ethan finally looked back, the Grin King was still standing in the doorway of the shop staring directly at him. Not angry. Interested. Almost. Pleased. Months later, Ethan finished writing the story. The article spread across the entire country overnight. The saddest smile inside the mind of Raven City's Grin King. In it, Ethan didn't describe a chaotic genius. He described a lonely man. A manipulator who surrounded himself with fear because he couldn't create real connection. A criminal who needed attention more than power. The article exploded across the internet. Talk shows debated it. Psychologists analyzed it. Citizens of Raven City read it in shock. But the most unexpected audience was inside Irongate Asylum. Doctors reported something strange. The Grin King had read the article. Over and over. And every time he finished it he just smiled. Because for the first time in his life, someone had truly seen him. And that made Ethan Vale the most important person in his world. At first nothing happened. Weeks passed after Ethan's article went viral. Raven City moved on to new scandals, new crimes, new headlines. Ethan tried to convince himself the story was finished. But the silence felt wrong. One night, Ethan returned to his apartment after a late interview. The hallway lights flickered softly above him as he unlocked the door. "Danny," Ethan called. No answer. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Ethan stepped inside. Then he froze. Danny, his roommate and oldest friend in the city, was tied to the wall in the living room. His head leaned forward motionless. His face was twisted into a horrifying permanent grin. Ethan's stomach dropped. A slow clapping sound echoed from the kitchen. "Well written, Ethan." "Really? 5 stars. The Grin King stepped into the room like a friendly neighbor dropping by for coffee. His purple coat was spotless. His eyes were bright with excitement. Ethan's fists clenched. "You ruined my life," Ethan whispered. The Grin King tilted his head. "No," he said gently. "You improved mine." He walked closer, studying Ethan carefully. "You were right about me. Lonely. Sad. Invisible." He smiled wider. "But now I have something special." Ethan backed away slowly. The Grin King leaned forward, almost whispering. "You." The room felt colder. "You see me," the Grin King said softly. Nobody ever did before. Ethan realized something terrifying in that moment. The Grin King wasn't angry about the article. He was grateful. And that meant Ethan wasn't a target. He was family. Ethan Vale disappeared. Within weeks of the incident in his apartment, he left Raven City behind. No goodbye interviews. No public statements. Just silence. He shaved his beard, changed his phone number, stopped using his real name. In a quiet coastal town hundreds of miles away, Ethan tried to start again. For the first time in months, life felt almost normal. That was where he met Mira. She was warm, patient, and nothing like the darkness Ethan had left behind. She didn't ask too many questions about his past, and Ethan never told her everything. Slowly, he began to believe he had escaped. A year passed. Then another. Ethan proposed on a calm summer evening by the ocean. Mira said yes. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt safe. Until the night he came home early from work. The house lights were on. Soft music floated through the living room. Ethan stepped inside. And stopped breathing. Mira stood in the center of the room, wearing her wedding dress. But she wasn't alone. The Grin King held her, gently swaying with the music like they were dancing at a wedding. He looked up and smiled brightly when he saw Ethan. "There you are," he said happily. Mira's eyes were wide with fear, but she stayed perfectly still. Ethan's voice cracked. "Take me," he whispered. "Just let her go." The Grin King's smile faded slightly, almost hurt. "Oh, Ethan," he said softly. "I could never hurt you." He stepped closer, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder like an old friend. "You're the only one who ever understood me." His voice lowered. "You're my best friend." In that moment, Ethan felt something inside him break. Because he finally understood. He would never escape. Ethan ran. After that night, something inside him snapped. He left the town, left his job, left everything behind again. This time he didn't try to build a new life. He just tried to disappear. Months later, Ethan was living alone in a small wooden cabin deep in the northern forests. No neighbors. No internet. No newspapers. Just trees, silence, and a locked rifle beside his bed. Every window was covered. Every door had 3 locks. Ethan slept with the lights on. Sometimes he thought he heard footsteps outside. Sometimes laughter in the wind. But every time he checked, there was nothing. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, the silence began to feel safe. Then one night, Ethan heard something new. Scratch. A faint sound under the floor. Ethan froze in the middle of the room. Scratch. Again. His heart pounded as he slowly reached for the rifle. The wooden floor creaked beneath his feet as he moved closer to the sound. The scratching stopped. Silence filled the cabin. Ethan knelt down and pressed his ear to the floorboards. Nothing. He stood up, shaking his head. Maybe it was just animals under the house. Maybe he was finally losing his mind. Then a voice rose from beneath the floor. Soft. Playful. Hey buddy. Ethan's blood turned cold. The floor hatch slowly lifted from below. A pale hand pushed it open. The Grin King crawled out of the darkness like he had been living there forever. Dust covered his coat. His smile was wide and delighted. I was starting to think you forgot about me, he said. Ethan raised the rifle with trembling hands. I'm not afraid of you anymore. He pulled the trigger. Click. A weak stream of water shot out of the barrel. The Grin King burst into laughter. Oh, Ethan, he said, wiping tears from his eyes. You're playing with a professional. The laughter filled the cabin. Ethan stood frozen still, holding the useless water gun. The Grin King wiped tears from the corners of his eyes, as if the whole moment was the funniest joke he had ever heard. Oh, Ethan, he said gently. You almost had me. Before Ethan could move, the Grin King tossed a small silver canister onto the wooden floor. A soft hiss filled the room. White gas spread quickly through the cabin. Ethan tried to run for the door, but his legs felt heavy. The walls began to twist and stretch around him. Shadows crawled across the ceiling like living things. The Grin King's voice echoed through the fog. You've been running for years, he said softly. That must be exhausting. Ethan swung wildly at the empty air, trying to fight shapes that weren't there. His heart pounded as laughter bounced off every wall. Then everything went dark. When the police finally arrived, the cabin was destroyed. Furniture overturned. Windows shattered. Ethan Vale was screaming at invisible enemies in the middle of the room. They took him away that night. Raven City never heard from Ethan again. Years later, doctors at Iron Gate Asylum finally declared him stable. After long treatment, they believed he could return to the world. But when the doctor told him the news, Ethan just shook his head slowly. No, he whispered. I'm safer here. That night, Ethan sat quietly in his cell when he heard a voice from the corner. Just promise you won't leave. Ethan smiled, thinking it was a guard. Then the voice changed. I can't lose another best friend. Ethan looked up. The Grin King was standing inside the cell. Ethan didn't scream. He just nodded. Because in Raven City, sometimes the Grin King doesn't end your life. He keeps you. Comment 1 for the next part.